What's up, friends? Liron here. Today what I want to talk to you about is watercolors, and specifically how to get a darker value, a darker, stronger color in watercolors. The reason I'm doing this video is I'm relatively new to watercolor, been at it for about, let's say, 6 months maximum, and the problem I personally run into a lot still is not being able to get a really dark tone, and you need that for contrast and for creating shadows and really dark areas. And I read about it and I researched a lot, and I saw this is an issue that a lot of people run into. Now, I'm not an expert yet, but from my experience there are a few things you can do to really get that nice tone, and today we're going to talk about that. So I'll show you a few simple methods that you can get a really strong color that allows you to create those beautiful shades and darker tones and things like this, because I personally love contrast. So let's get started, see what we can create here. First of all, I want to give you a few pointers here, and you can look at my color palette in the meantime. I want to give you some general pointers for being able to successfully create darker tones in watercolor. So first, I want you to remember that color dries much brighter than it appears to be when you just put it on the paper. I'll show you what I mean. If we now take just some pigment here, and I'll apply this layer. It's very dark in the beginning because I just dipped it straight into the pigment, but then again there is some water here, so it mixes in. Anyway, let's add some more darkness to it. Now, it appears to be in this value or tone, whatever you want to call it, but what will happen is that once it dries, it will dry much brighter than it appears. So this is something important to remember, just as a general guideline when you're trying to produce a specific level of darkness. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to mention is that if you really want to get like large washes of water and you want to get them dark, it's far better to use tubes than pan. I usually use pan. The thing is with pan is that you need to really work hard on getting the pigment out, and it can limit you in the darkness that you can achieve. And I find that I have less of this issue with the tubes. I have a few more here with these ones. Okay, these ones are easier to get the tone out of. Some of the colors I have here are actually from the tubes, like the ultramarine blue here. I ran out of it, and so I used the one in the tube, which I don't have here, but it's somewhere around here. It's not one of these. So I used the tube one to fill in the pan, which is something you can do, or you can just work with something like this, just to mix like a palette. These are all from the tubes. And I just find that with tubes it's easier to get more of the pigment off of the, you don't have water in it. And this mixture of the pan ones, yeah, you get the point, it's a bit harder. So that's the second point I wanted to go over. Now, the next thing I would recommend is that you make a study like this one of all of the colors that you have. What I basically did was divide it into like this side. I hope you can see this, and this side, and it's the exact same colors, but I test the different mixings. So if I mix the permanent lemon yellow with the yellow ochre, this is what I get. If I'm like this with the permanent red, this is what I get, and so on and so forth. And then you can see what tones are naturally a bit darker. What mixtures lead to darker colors. So in this example I'd say this one's pretty dark, and of course it depends on how much pigment you get out of these two, but each pigment has its own limitations. We'll talk about that in a moment. So hopefully this helps you a bit as well. So 3 general tips. First one, remember that it dries much lighter than it appears. Second one, use tubes if it's easier to take out the pigment from them. And the third, make a study like the one I just showed you. Now let's move on to some more practical things. The first advice I'd give you is to just use more pigment than water, which is the obvious way of doing this. So if I want to get, sorry, my computer is making some noises in the background. Anyway, if you want to get a darker tone, you need to use more pigment in your mixture. So if I put some pigment here, and of course if I'll add water to it, it'll become much brighter. So what you can do is put first off a lot of pigment and then mix it with a small amount of water and then just start to apply it, because it can't be too dry, because if it's too dry it just won't leave the brush. So you do need a minimum amount of water. And you can continue working with it if it's not dark enough. Just dip your brush straight into the pigment and just put it in like this, like mix it when it's still wet. So just by adding more pigment, you can get it to be much, like, significantly darker. Now, it seems like an obvious advice, but so many people, including myself, we mix way too much water, and I don't know why it's such a common issue, but for some reason in the beginning it's really hard to judge exactly the quantity, the right quantity of So this is it. Just use more pigment, even more than you would think you need. Okay, even more than you'd think you need. Let me perhaps zoom in a bit, just so you can see it better. Okay. The next advice I want to give you is, from my experience, if you mix complementary colors, you can get pretty dark tones. And I have a few favorite mixtures. I will show them to you now. The first mixture I like to use is the Madder Lake Deep. It's this one here. Anything that's like reddish or even rose, if you can mix that with, let's say, a Viridian Green, you can get pretty dark mixture there. You can immediately see that it becomes darker. Let's just try it out just a bit. I know it's a small amount, okay? So still pretty light, I'd say. But let's try adding more pigment even. So I'll add a bit more. And remember, you need some water, so I will dip it into my water jar that you can't see here. It's outside of the frame, sorry about that. So I dip and get a lot of pigment out, add it to the mixture here, and then I go, sometimes I don't really, it's a matter of preference, I don't care, I just go straight into the color. I really don't care to make it dirty, I can clean it later, but some people really prefer to make it well organized. I don't care about that. So I just go straight from the red and get some more green, and look at that dark color here. You see, it's gotten even darker. Let's go ahead and exaggerate it, like really exaggerate it. I'm gonna get a lot of pigment from these two. And once you start feeling like your brush can take out more, you need to make it a little more wet. So just make sure to pay attention to that. So what I'll usually do is dry it on a tissue here on the side, clean it up, that you cannot see, again, sorry, and then dab it into the tissue again just to get rid of some of the water, and then come back and take more pigment. Now I'm gonna make this disgustingly dark. Okay, so yeah, see, gets even darker. But remember, it's gonna dry much brighter than that. So let's get it even more dark. You see this? This is a nice tone. Remember, again, yes, it's gonna dry much brighter and dark and lighter than it is now, so it's something to take into account. So let's try another color combination, and remember, now we're talking about mixing complementary or opposing colors for the most part. Another one that I like to use is the ultramarine blue together with burnt umber. I find that this also gets me a pretty dark mixture. I want you to remember, generally speaking, that, as I mentioned earlier, each color has its own ceiling limitation. It can't get darker than X, whatever it is. So with time you will learn the maximum ability or capacity of a color to turn darker. Okay, so this is also important, because if you're trying to get a dark tone with a yellow, like lemon yellow, you won't get too far. And this applies to these mixtures as well. If you're trying to get a really dark tone with two bright colors, you may not get there. Okay, so as you can see, also pretty dark, and I can just dip directly into the pigment and just put it in there directly, like this. and you see how it gets significantly darker, okay? I will mention at this point that I'm using an Arches, let me just show you the paper. It's an Arch, this a grain, rough texture. It's a really good paper, and this company, this brand, Arch in general, is really good. And I can't stress how important it is. Like, I can't stress enough how important the paper is, because you won't be able to do what I'm doing now, which is like the simplest function of watercolor, to grab some pigment and put it now and mix it with already existing color. You won't be able to do that with a cheaper paper. It's gonna just dry really fast, and it's just not going to work. So in watercolor, I find that you really need to get the best materials. You can't just go cheap from the beginning, because then you just won't get fun results. Let me just check how long this is recording. Okay, we're like 10 minutes. I don't want to make it too long. So let's move on to the last piece of advice. There are some more mixtures you can use. I like also a burnt umber and sap green. I like these, burnt sienna and sap green. I find it also produces a darker tone. And lastly, yes, okay, so let's move on to the final tip, which is layering. When you're done with one layer of watercolor, which I have one here that I pre-made for this purpose, you can just go over it with another layer. Let's take, for example, the ultramarine here. Mix, mix, mix. Mix, mix, mix. And if we just go over this one, it will get darker, okay? And the thing is, you know, most watercolors are transparent relatively. They're not opaque, I think. So as a medium in general, it's a very transparent one. It's translucent, translucid. I always get confused with these words. It's not like acrylics that you can just put a color, like put white over black and get white. So layering is just like adding another layer of transparent color, and eventually it gets darker, okay? So let's just, this is the final piece of advice here. I'm still learning this stuff, like there's a lot to learn. But let's go over them quickly, just from the beginning to the end, to make sure you got everything right, and maybe I'll add like a text somewhere around here that you can see it. First, remember, the color dries much brighter than it appears in the beginning, okay? Take that into consideration. Second, use tubes instead of pans if you really need to get large surfaces of darker tones. That's the second. Third, make a study like this one that will help you understand which tones, which colors create, which mixtures create darker values, and even brighter, you know. I'm talking about darker here, but even brighter is important to know. Just general values of colors. And so that's the third one. Fourth one, use more pigment, less water. Seems obvious, but a lot of people fall with that one. And fifth one, use complementary mixing, experience different mixtures of colors. It also can help. And the last one, layering, because it's a transparent medium, you layer and you get it to be darker. That's it, that's all my advice. Friends, I want to thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave a comment, ask for a video, ask any questions, whatever you want to know or hear from me, feel free to. Also, I wanted, just as a quick update, there's gonna be a lot of changes in the next few months. I will add all sorts of topics and videos and things that I want to discuss, just generally about my journey and where I'm headed. So hopefully you can all benefit from it, and I'd be happy if you all come aboard. One last thing, I'm now on Snapchat, so I will share my Snap code here, and it's gonna be such a major channel of communication for me with you guys, so I'd be happy if you follow me there. Feel free to, it's Liron, Liron, Y-A-N, Yan, 3, number 3, so Lironian, number 3, all together. I'm gonna write it down here. Thanks again for watching, I appreciate it, and I'll see you in another video, hopefully really soon, and until then, take care.